Can I be a sex positive person and a spiritual person at the same time? That is the question I've been pondering lately. If you are pressed for time and you just want me to get to the point, here's the answer that I've come up with for myself. I don't know. Maybe. If you have a little more time and you want to settle in with me, then I'm going to talk about some of my own personal history with spirituality and more specifically with religion and how that's related to some of my personal beliefs. Yeah, maybe grab a snack or something. Growing up, I was raised Christian. My parents both practiced Christianity, and I would say it was a pretty casual kind of Christianity. My extended family, particularly my mom's extended family, were much more devout, and Christianity was central to the way that they lived their lives. They lived in Bermuda, and in the summers I would go and stay with them as a kid. My grandparents and my uncle really saw Christianity as the only path to salvation. You know, they definitely believed that there was an afterlife, and they believed that if you were a Christian and that if you lived according to what they saw as, you know, God's will and God's plan, then, and you accepted Jesus into your heart, then you would go to heaven. And that if you didn't do that, and that if those weren't your beliefs, that you would go to hell. And so being Christian is something they very much wanted for me as their grandchild and their niece, and as someone that they loved. And when I was with them, Christianity was part of our day-to-day lives, not just something that happened on Sunday when we went to church. It influenced things like the way that they chose to dress and the way that they expected me to dress. I had to dress more modestly when I was with them compared to how I dressed when I was here in Canada with my parents. It influenced, you know, the type of entertainment they would let me engage with. So again, when I was here in Canada, for example, you know, I could listen to, you know, just regular, I guess, secular radio. You know, I listened to top 40 pop music. I wasn't allowed to listen to that sort of stuff. When I was in Bermuda, we mostly listened to Christian radio stations, and I remember my uncle buying me some Christian music for kids, which I actually really liked. And I don't want to paint this picture of my extended family as being these like super dour, you know, terrible people. They were actually very kind, and for the most part I enjoyed being with them, but I felt really ambivalent about Christianity and the way that they practiced it. On the one hand, what I really liked was I liked the sense of community, and I liked the connection to my family. My uncle was a preacher, my grandfather was a preacher, my grandmother and my aunt were really involved in the church, and then as children, my cousins and I, you know, would be involved as well. And most of all, I think I liked knowing that there was sort of a path to a happy afterlife. That was a very comforting idea to me as a child for whom death, you know, was quite a scary prospect. There were things that I found really challenging. Like I said, their rules and expectations were more restrictive than what I was used to when I was here in Canada and when I was with my parents. It was hard to adjust to some of the rules and the expectations, especially because I didn't understand all of the rules and expectations. So for example, I mentioned that they dressed more modestly than my parents and I did, and I didn't quite understand sort of where the boundaries were or why they existed because I was just a little kid. Like for example, I remember I had one outfit that I was allowed to wear at home, and it was shorts and a top, but the top was like not a full crop top, but it didn't quite meet the shorts. And you know, that was something I wore at home. And I mean, I was little, like I think it was like 5 or something. And it was fine for me to wear it at home, but when I was with my other family, they were like, that's not appropriate. And it was because there was like that little band of skin exposed. And I didn't really understand why, you know, for example, it was okay for me to wear shorts and a t-shirt, and it was okay for my like legs and arms to be exposed, but not my stomach. I knew that, yes, there was a path to salvation and going to heaven, but I very early on got the impression that there were a lot of things that I could do or not do that would take me off of that path, and that would wind up with me going to hell, and that was super scary to me. And then there were things I didn't like about it because they just seemed difficult and or boring. Like, I really liked Sunday school, but I didn't like the part after Sunday school where we had to go to regular church and sit in the pew and listen to the sermon. That just seemed really long and boring to me. As I got older, my extended family remained, as far as I could tell, very consistent in their Christianity and their Christian beliefs and their practice. For me and my parents, so my immediate family, it just started to fall off over the years, and I don't think there was any real major reason for it. We just sort of stopped going to church regularly, and then we stopped going all together, and, you know, other small things like, you know, saying grace and just having conversations about God and Jesus and Christianity just became less and less frequent. And by the time I was a teenager, it really wasn't part of my life at all. When I was in my last year of high school, so I guess I would have been 18, there's a girl that I was sort of friendly with in my algebra class, and one day she invited me to a party, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go to a party with you. When I got there, it turned out to be a Christian youth group, and they were having a party, and I actually had a really good time. The people there seemed really interesting, and they seemed really nice, and they asked me if I wanted to come with them to their church. And so I did, and the church service was dynamic and it seemed relevant to my interests. And like I said, I really liked the people, and I felt a connection with them. And so I kept going to events and, you know, checked out their Sunday church a few more times. And they started asking me and encouraging me to get baptized in their church. I wasn't sure at first, but eventually I did. This was the other very significant religious experience I had, because as soon as I was baptized, the church consumed my entire life. And that was by design. In this church, they believed that this was the one true church, is I think the way that they would put it. Not only was the only path to salvation through God and accepting Jesus in your heart, the only path to salvation was through being a member of this specific church. So everything that you did outside of school or work, the expectation was that it involved the church. So all your friends were in the church, all of your social activities were through the church. You were expected to go to worship and church meetings whenever there was one, unless you were super, super sick. And so very quickly, this church became my whole life. And for some of you, I know you must be thinking, like, what were you doing? Why would you? Whew. This room is getting really hot. I got umbrella lights on. I don't know if that's why, but I'm gonna take off this sweater. So give me a second. I'm sure some of you were thinking, like, whoa, what were you doing? Like, what were you thinking? But for where I was at that time in my life, that church offered me a lot that was very appealing for me. You know, it was a very ethnically diverse church, and I wound up making a lot of, I had a lot of Black female friends, which for, a kid who had grown up in a predominantly white suburb of Toronto was a super big deal, because I didn't have a lot of Black friends outside of my family. I had that, sense that, okay, I know the way forward. I know what's gonna happen to me after I die. And it gave me, what felt like a structure and a purpose to my life at a time when, I was 18, I was about to leave high school. I wasn't super sure about what I wanted to do. The church gave me a lot of what felt like security and stability. But then there was the flip side, and similarly to when I was a kid, there was, a lot of anxiety about falling off what was even a narrower path than the one that my extended family had prescribed for me. This one was extremely narrow. I very quickly discovered that in this church, there wasn't a lot of room to, explore ideas or for discussion or for debate. It was do what you're being told, don't question it. And if you questioned it, then that was an indication that you didn't have sufficient faith, or that you were prideful was a word that I remember hearing a lot. And that was challenging for me as someone who is, I think, a little bit naturally skeptical and a little bit naturally cynical, and who had been raised to question and examine and analyze things. Then there was a challenge that I had never experienced as a young child with my family, because I wasn't a young child anymore. I was an 18-year-old. And that was around the time for me that I really, really began to mature in terms of having like an adult erotic sexual drive. That's when I really started to feel it. When I started looking at other people, particularly boys and men, and being like, oh, okay, like I want to do stuff with you, I want to touch you, I want you to touch me. I really, that whole drive really kicked in for me on a biological level, and also like on an emotional level. The church saw sexuality outside of a heterosexual marriage as deeply sinful. We were forbidden to engage with sexuality on any level. So certainly we were not allowed to have sex outside of marriage, but we were not allowed to talk about sex. We were not allowed to talk about, you know, anything that was even remotely related to sex. We were told that even thinking about sex or anything related to sex or sexuality was akin to performing the act, and therefore was deeply sinful. Basically, the expectation was that you were to suppress all of your sexual thoughts and feelings until you were married, which is maybe not super unusual or unexpected for a Christian church, but I will say it was extremely challenging. It was especially challenging because I met a guy and we were friends, and I quickly developed a crush on him, and soon discovered that, you know, those feelings were reciprocal, and I really, really wanted to be with this person. And, you know, we resisted for, well, it felt like a long time. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks in real time. But, you know, eventually we did get together. We didn't have sex. But, you know, we would hang out at each other's houses, and we would like watch movies together, and we would talk, and we would hold hands, and we would kiss, and we would cuddle, and like none of that was chill with the church. When I think back on that relationship, you know, there's definitely a lot of positive memories I have. You know, that guy was the first guy that I ever really loved, and so, you know, that relationship always holds a special place in my heart. And, you know, even some of the like sneaking around and, you know, stealing kisses and holding hands in secret, especially in the early days, you know, I kind of have some fond memories of that. It was a little bit exciting, and it was just kind of thrilling to know that, you know, someone that I liked me back. I wish I actually could have enjoyed those experiences more, because now when I can sort of, you know, mentally remove the guilt from it, I was like, those were really pleasant experiences, but then this horrible guilt would come crashing down on me, and I know it did for him too, and it really sort of marred the experience, and that makes me a little bit sad for us. It makes me sad for our younger selves. So to make a long story like a tiny bit less long, I stayed in that church for, oh God, it was well over a year. And then my, for all intents and purposes, boyfriend and I left. He left first, and then I left very shortly after. And leaving this church was a little bit like leaving the mafia. Once you were gone, it was pretty much like you were dead to them. I immediately lost all of my friends, all of my social support. But in my head, I also believed that I was basically dead to God, that I didn't have any access to God, and I didn't really have any right to a spiritual life. And over time, I let go of this idea that I was a bad person, and I let go of the idea that, you know, I was doomed, that I was going to hell. But I also just had to let go. I also let go of the idea of being a spiritual person. And I really started to see, you know, spirituality and religion as the antithesis of the person that I was becoming, and the person that I was starting to really enjoy being, you know, this person who was learning and embracing and, you know, teaching about sex positivity and, like I said, diversity, and you know, a person who was pro-choice and a person who was feminist, and all of those things. And I was just like, well, you can be one or you can be the other. You can be a religious person, or you can be the kind of person that I am, and never the twain shall meet. And so that's how I reconciled those two pieces. I thought, well, religion and spirituality is definitely something that I see other people engaging in, and I can accept that and try to be respectful of it, but it's not something that I can have. For most of my adult life, I've been disconnected from anything to do with religion and by extension spirituality, because I've just been so daunted by the idea of trying to have, you know, religious and spiritual beliefs align with my other personal beliefs. And I haven't really known, like, well, how would I even, you know, practice or engage with spirituality in an authentic way. A couple of years ago, I was doing a leadership training with the Unitarian Universalist Church called Our Whole Lives. And Our Whole Lives is a sex ed program for teens that this church runs. And so when I was in this program, I was working with a bunch of other sex ed leaders, all of whom were Christian. I was the only one who wasn't. And it was the first time that I saw that, yes, actually, sex positivity and gender and sexual diversity and acceptance and inclusion and, you know, a pro-choice perspective and a feminist perspective and racial diversity and all of these things could be part of a Christian practice. And so that just like kind of opened the door of possibility for me a little bit. And so that idea and those thoughts is something that's been, you know, percolating in the back of my mind probably for a couple of years now. You know, is there a way for me to, if not have a religious practice, at least have a spiritual practice in my life that allows for all of these other beliefs that I have? Even more recently, I've started considering the fact that perhaps those beliefs that I have, you know, my belief in sex positivity and all of the things around that, not only can coexist with a spiritual practice, but are perhaps, you know, gifts or things that I have been given by some sort of higher power. I really miss having some kind of spiritual practice in my life, and so more recently I've started praying. I don't know who I am praying to. You know, it's not the prayers of my childhood where I'm kneeling down and saying, "Dear God." I'm not even really talking. I'm just, I don't know, emoting, but with intention and to. Again, I don't have a word for it because I can't even like give form or thought to what this power might be, but just putting things out to the universe. Again, oh, so woo, I'm sorry. I also have realized that I want to have faith. And when I say faith, I don't mean, okay, you know, the world is what it is, somebody's steering the ship and making all the decisions and I have no responsibility or agency in what I do. It's not that. But that, you know, I can do what I can do. You know, I can make choices, you know, in my career, in my family, in my personal life. You know, there are always decisions I can make, and I get to decide what I can bring to the table within my own abilities. And that if I do that to the best of my own abilities, that there are other factors at play that I don't control, and to just allow those things to play out, and to have some degree of trust that those things will play out as they're meant to. I completely acknowledge that that could be bullshit and it could just be something that I'm telling myself to make myself feel better, but I decided to just make the choice to believe in that. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and so be it. That's where I am with sex positivity and spirituality. I'm gonna see if I can have both in my life, and I'm going to start with these two little things, prayer and faith, and I'm gonna see where that leads me. In the comments below, if you would like to, I would love to hear about some of your spiritual or religious practices and what they mean to you. And definitely if you're also someone who identifies as sex positive or identifies in some of the ways that I mentioned in this video, and you do have a spiritual or religious practice, I would love to hear how those two work together for you. Thank you for watching what I'm sure even once I edit it will be a very long vlog, but I really wanted to talk about this today, and I'll try to keep you posted as I think about this and process it more. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.